In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how I achieve my perfect yellow base coats. This is something that was featured in my Imperial Fists Let's Paint video, and is among the most requested hobby topics across the channel. So here we go, let's paint perfect yellow base coats. For this workflow, I will be using an airbrush for all the processes, but take note that the yellow tinting steps are where the airbrush application is critical. This base coat is achieved by blasting contrast Iandin yellow through an airbrush over top of a wraithbone base coat. The reason why I value this technique so much is that to achieve a yellow base coat that looks this smooth is a rather monotonous task using standard brush applications, as you would have to do several very thin layers to build up a similarly smooth result. This time on the table I have some Eldar Wraiths. With the models already primed and having their wraithbone base coats applied, the only step beyond this point is to use the contrast Iandin yellow through the airbrush and tint this to our perfect yellow. But there are a few things to go over before the yellow tinting steps. Firstly, my air pressure level is currently set to about 25 psi. Next, make sure you give your Iandin yellow a good shake. If it hasn't been used in a while, contrast paints tend to separate. If that's the case, shake it until the separation is no longer visible. Once done, we can begin the tinting process. I pour the contrast paint right into the airbrush bowl, as if I have excess contrast paint when the job's done, I want to be able to pour it back into the paint pot. All the control comes from the application. So, what you will notice when using this technique is that the Iandin yellow is super effective, meaning when being sprayed into the same area continuously, it doesn't take long for the Iandin yellow to build up, blowing past the yellow and turning into an orange color. So instead, on the second wraith, let's try it differently. I find it much easier to work in short pulses, as it grants much more control over the Iandin yellow's buildup. You need to shift around to different areas and avoid overlaps, so the Iandin yellow does not result in that overblown orange tone. But as you can see, with a bit of practice, it isn't too hard. Ideally, you want the Iandin yellow to dry soon after it lands on the surface of the model. That end result is affected by multiple variables, which include the distance the paint needs to travel to the model, the PSI you are using, and the humidity of your painting environment. What makes this easier is the short pulse technique. Because the short pulses involve pulling the lever back and then releasing it forward, all while keeping the lever pressed down, it allows you to use that airflow to help ensure the paint is drying soon after it hits the model. I find this extremely useful for keeping the workflow quick, but also controlled for the goal of achieving that ideal yellow tone. And that's pretty much the core of the technique. But since we're here and I got the paint out, let's bang out one more. So that's it, the recipe for my perfect quick yellow base coats. For bright colors like this, I would always recommend using recessed washes or diluting your wash with Lamy and medium, like how I did in my Imperial Fists video. Now these are a pretty great tabletop standard in my opinion for a yellow base coat, especially so for the amount of time spent. It resulted in a thin application of paint and has some nice tonal variety. But there's one last bonus step for those so inclined. Upon closer examination, you can see that the Iandin yellow has left a speckling effect in some areas. Honestly, this could be due to one of the many variables that come into play when using an airbrush, but my guess is that it may be due to the needle size. But why that isn't important. What is important is that this last step will unify that speckling. But for real, if anyone knows why that is, I would be keen to learn. So if you know what causes that speckling, leave a comment below. For this process, I will be using equal parts Uriel yellow mixed with flow improver. The goal here is again to create another semi-transparent glaze. As we know, we can't rely on using Iandin yellow, because if it layers too heavily, it likes to turn orange. I'm applying this Uriel yellow tint sparingly. The idea is to unify the speckled areas, so again I'm using short pulses, allowing the paint to dry before blasting it with more paint. In this way, I can be sure to put on as much or as little paint that I deem necessary. and ultimately it leaves us with a result that I find extremely satisfying for the amount of time spent. And that brings this quick Let's Paint video to its end. I hope this video was useful for everyone who wanted a bit more clarification on how I approach yellow base coats. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments section below this video. So, if you enjoyed this video, there's a like button, and if you want to help my channel grow, there is the subscribe button. There is also a bell and a share button, so press the buttons you want to press. Thanks again for watching, and I will hope to see you guys in the next one.